the resurrection. Let's review, before we go on to the resurrection. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon of the crucifixion, Jesus gave up the ghost and died. The next day was the Passover Sabbath, which began at sunset, which was about 6 o'clock that evening. Since the Jewish people did not allow dead bodies to hang on crosses during the Passover, and the beginning of the Passover Sabbath was only 3 hours away, there was no time to lose in taking Jesus' body down from the cross and getting it buried. To hasten the death of those crucified, soldiers would often break their legs, so they broke the legs of the two thieves. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. However, one of the soldiers thrust a spear into the side of Jesus, and when he saw blood and water flow from the wound, he knew that Jesus was dead. While all this was happening, a few remained at Calvary, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and Salome, the mother of James and John, were overwhelmed with deep sorrow. They watched and waited in helpless misery. Work had to be done quickly in order to get the body of Jesus buried before sunset. Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple of Jesus, had gone boldly to Pilate and received permission to bury the body of his Lord. Joseph was a very wealthy and respected member of the Jewish community. Up until this point, he had not declared his belief in Jesus because of fear of the Jews. Joseph was assisted by Nicodemus, another rich member of the Sanhedrin. Nicodemus was the same man who had earlier come to Jesus by night to learn that he had to be born again in order to go to heaven. Nicodemus evidently had also been a secret follower of Jesus, but now he bravely came forward so that all could see that he was a friend and follower of Jesus. The men gently lowered the body of Jesus, wrapped in fine linen cloth, and carried it to the tomb. The new tomb or cave hewn out of rock was located in Joseph of Arimathea's beautiful garden near the hill where Jesus had been crucified. They washed off his dead body and wound around it strips of white linen cloth saturated with ointment and spices of myrrh and aloes. A separate piece of linen cloth, a napkin, was put around the head, as was the Jewish custom for burial. Since the tomb had never been used before, evidently Joseph of Arimathea had made it for himself and his family. A large stone slab was outside the entrance to close up the rock tomb or sepulchre, as it was often called. After the body was wrapped in linen cloth and the smaller cloth put over the face, they rolled the huge rock slab in front of the entrance and returned to their homes. What a dark, sad time that was for all who loved the Lord. All their hopes were gone, and their hearts were filled with despair. Jesus was dead. What would they do without him? Now they had nothing to live for. With Jesus dead, the enemies of Jesus rejoiced. They knew where he was buried and went to Pilate, urging him to place Roman soldiers outside the tomb to guard it, because they remembered that Jesus had promised, "After 3 days I will rise again." They told Pilate, "His disciples will probably go at night and steal his body and hide it and tell everybody he is risen from the dead." So Pilate ordered soldiers to guard the tomb. Jesus' enemies apparently thought they could keep Jesus in the grave. To them, he was dead, buried, and locked in a rock tomb with soldiers guarding the tomb. Weren't they ignorant and foolish to think that they could lock God in a tomb? Very, very early one Sunday morning, the day after the weekly Sabbath, while it was still dark inside the cool, damp tomb, the most wonderful thing happened that has ever taken place in the history of the world. Jesus Christ arose from the dead. He went right through the grave clothes, leaving them behind the way a butterfly leaves its cocoon. He left the grave clothes in the shape of his body like a shell lying on the stone surface in the tomb. Suddenly, as the day began to dawn, the earth shuddered and quaked. The quake seemed to shake the whole hill on which the crosses stood. The Roman soldiers guarding Jesus' tomb jumped to attention. It seemed as if the whole world were reeling and trembling. Inside the tomb, Jesus stood up, removed the napkin from his face and head, folded it neatly, and laid it down where his head had been. He had risen from the dead, never to die again. He won the victory and conquered sin, Satan, death, and the grave. All of his enemies were defeated. Jesus left the tomb in his risen, glorified body. Instantaneously, in resurrection power and glory, he went right through the rock entrance. There was a blazing burst of light, and a dazzling, beautiful angel appeared from heaven. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was a brilliant white. The angel rolled back the great heavy stone covering the entrance to the tomb and sat on the huge rock door. The soldiers were terrified of the angel, and they fell on the ground in a dead faint. As soon as the soldiers came to and recovered a little from their fright, they fled to Jerusalem to tell the religious leaders. The religious leaders bribed them to tell a lie, so the soldiers told everyone, "While we slept, his disciples stole the body away." But of course, only those who did not want to know the truth would believe that lie. And for how can men know what is going on if they are asleep? In those days, people brought spices and ointments to honor someone who had died. Today, we send flowers in honor of the dead. The group of faithful Galilean women who had remained at the cross and later had watched the burial of Jesus had prepared perfumed embalming spices and ointments to bring to anoint the body of Jesus. Before sunrise on that first Easter Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene, Salome, Mary, the mother of James, and other women were coming to the tomb in Joseph's garden to put these ointments on the body of their beloved master. As they walked along in the semi-darkness, they talked about the problem that was worrying them just then. They asked themselves, who will roll away the big stone from the door? We'll never be able to get to the body of Jesus. As they came within sight of the grave, suddenly they stopped. Something had happened.